phone close. Okay, here's the situation. Back on the record. I was informed by my deputy that we had given a break to take Mr. Bashara back to the jail so he could take his meds.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I cannot hear you.
Okay, we took a break to get Mr. Bashara to go back to the jail to take his medication. The nurse indicated they wouldn't give it to him till 4, so they did not give it to him today. So we're going to have to break by 3:45 in order for him to take his medicine, because they didn't give it to him today. They told him to stay in court. So I thought that they were going to transport him to take his medicine, but they refused to do it, so he has to have it by 4 o'clock. So continue, Counselor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think before we broke, one of the questions I asked you is whether you discussed strategy with Ms. Diallo and also, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the things that you discussed was the medical records of the victim, Mrs. Bashara, correct?
You know, to say medical records, I don't think that we discussed that. I think what we talked about was the fact that she had this condition, according to Mr. Bashara, that he thought would be relevant, and I didn't think it was a good idea to get into that.
And that was a condition with her vagina?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so it never went to the point where we were talking about any kind of medical records.
And that, but as far as going into any medical conditions she had, as far as the issue with her vagina, there was something that you and Ms. Diallo decided strategically not to present, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you're the attorney.
But you were aware of this issue.
Oh yes, he told me that.
But you decided to forego that.
Right.
Oh, okay, very good.
Okay, and both you and Ms. Diallo, you're both attorneys, correct?
Yes.
And you were assigned this case to represent Ms. Bashara, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Bashara is not an attorney, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Now going back to...
But let me interrupt you for a minute. When you all discussed this with him, you and Ms. Diallo, he made you aware of the issue, you discussed it with him. Ultimately, did he have any opinion about what should be done after you all told him that that shouldn't be something that you should go into?
Well,
was he in agreement, rather, or disagreement?
I believe that he was in agreement. I mean, there was no argument about it. It was just, I don't
But you
think
believe
this
that
is a
he
good
was
idea.
in agreement?
Yes,
okay.
I believe so. Then.
And is that sort of typical of how your relationship with yours and Ms. Diallo's relationship was with the defendant, that when something you brought up to him, there's sort of an agreement eventually reached with him?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had a strategy. We had points that we wanted to hit very hard on cross-examination. We had a case to present that, you know, we followed throughout the course of the trial. He was certainly a part of our discussions because we met, the three of us, on a number of occasions prior to the trial and even during the course of the trial. And I thought that everyone was in agreement that this was the way that we should go. But, you know, in the final analysis, there are very few things, matters of trial tactics, that it is up to the defendant to decide. Ultimately, he gets to decide whether he wants to waive a jury, if that was a possibility for him, or whether he's going to testify. But as far as how these witnesses should be called, or whether they should be called, what evidence is going to be helpful, what isn't going to be, those are tactical decisions that are made by the lawyers. That's my responsibility as the person charged with representing and defending him.
And you made those decisions, correct?
Oh, yes.
Now, one of the things that was brought up is about J.J. Mckee.
Yes.
And the question was presented to you, did you believe that this was an important witness for the defense?
You know, J.J. Mckee was helpful in the sense that we were able to point out the fact that the prosecution didn't get his phone records. We got that out of Stan Brew, I think during rebuttal. We got information regarding his whereabouts from Captain Locke into the record during the presentation of the defense. How helpful J.J. Mckee was going to be if he was a live body in there is matter of speculation. The idea that he was going to come in and say that, yes, I assisted Joe Gentz in this killing is, very unlikely. And the fact that he was with Joe Gentz afterward in a public place in a time frame that fit in with Joe Gentz dropping the body off at 6:45 up at Hoover and 7 Mile Road, being in that McDonald's shortly afterward at 7 in Gratiot, and then being back down in that bar, would leave it so that JJ had nothing to do with the killing, but was simply somebody that hung out and drank with Joe Gentz and we saw him that night.
So you're not aware of any evidence that J.J. Gentz would present that would dispute J.J. Mckee would present, they would dispute that Joseph Gentz was the person who murdered the victim in this particular case?
No, I mean, I have absolutely no knowledge of anything like that.
And you were unaware of any evidence that J.J. Mckee would dispute the fact that the defendant solicited Joe Gentz to commit that murder?
No, I have no knowledge of anything like that.
During your testimony, you testified that you made a decision not to raise quote-unquote Brady issue in this particular case.
Yes.
Okay. And what was your reason for that?
Well, because I thought we would get more mileage out of the fact that it wasn't there. The clothing is what you're talking about for Mrs. Bashara. The fact that that wasn't there was going to be helpful to us. And then during the course of the trial, in fact, when it was revealed to us that this leafy material contradicted, the testing done at Michigan State contradicted the testimony of Moses Jimenez, who said that those leaves came from the garage floor. That just blew that right out of the water. I put that clothing in the same category of the fact that that report hadn't been presented to anyone, and that these are question marks, and it goes to the court's instruction about making a decision based solely upon the evidence or the lack of evidence. And I made that point in the closing argument that here are some lacks of evidence that create reasonable doubt. J.J. Mckee was like that too.
But the difference is you knew about the clothing issue before the trial.
That's true.
You
yes.
didn't know about the leafy issue until in the midst of trial.
That's right. That was just like frosting on the cake.
Okay.
Now, as far as knowing about the clothing prior to trial, what you knew was that the clothing was not picked up from the medical examiners, correct?
That's what I understand. They got a rule of 48 hours. Either you pick it up or it's given away.
Okay. And so what wasn't evident before trial or even during trial was whether there was any exculpatory evidence of this clothing, correct?
Oh, right. One of the points I made was that there was a speculation about the marking along the side of the vehicle that probably, according to the witnesses from the police department who testified about this, probably came from Mrs. Bashara being rubbed against that vehicle in a struggle. Well, I made the point in the end, well, where's the evidence that shows that? We don't have that. This is nothing but speculation. So I thought that we did just fine with the lack of that evidence to make points to show that reasonable doubt existed.
Moving on to probably going to be my last point is Joseph Gentz. Was there anything that you feel you could have done to have Joseph Gentz testify?
No, he exercised his right under the Constitution not to testify. The case law is clear on that. You take the fifth, and you can't, unless they're being granted immunity, but that wasn't ever done by the prosecution. And so he was able to stand on his decision that he was not going to testify. He claimed that they reneged, the prosecution team reneged on a deal where he was going to get 5 years on a second-degree murder. That seemed quite incredible to me. And nevertheless, that was the story that he told when he was here in court on the 10th of October last year. And he was unavailable. I mean, I couldn't get him on the witness stand because he's taking the Fifth. You cannot put a witness on the stand if you know that they're going to exercise their right under the Fifth Amendment to remain silent.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Redirect.
Part of the purpose of the questionnaires being sent out was to weed out the jurors that had a bias already, correct?
Purpose, they weren't sent out, they were handed out.
Handed out.
And the purpose of the questionnaires was to see people, find out about them as much as we could, and yes, to get rid of those who had a bias.
All right, and don't you think it would, I mean, you tell us, some of the jurors stated, correct, that they had an absolute bias against Bob Bashara in front of all the other jurors.
Yeah, that happened.
And don't you think it'd be a better practice that if separately questioning each and every juror, so that it doesn't taint the whole juror?
Well, first of all, when you talk about separately questioning every juror, if you're going to ask them a lot of questions about the facts and circumstances of the case, that might be something to do, possibly individually. But as I recall, these were people who said they had biases, and they were, one guy unsolicited, you have it in your motion there, quoted, that he said, well, he's guilty of that thing having to do with Joe Gentz, so he must be guilty about this. That kind of thing comes out during jury questioning a lot. People volunteer things. So as far as I was concerned, that was a well conducted procedure to find fair-minded jurors who did not hold a bias at the beginning and promised to make their decision based solely on the evidence presented during the course of the trial, or the lack of evidence.
With regard to Joseph Bruce, you had met, was he an investigator that you were intimately involved with in terms of asking him things to do, or did you have the other investigator that you were more working with?
I asked Mr. Bruce to do things, and he did them. I identified those things this morning.
All right.
I wasn't intimately involved with anybody, other than perhaps...
In a professional level, Mr.
Well, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about being intimately involved any
what I
other
mean
way.
about intimate, I wasn't having daily contact, if that's what you mean. Mrs. Diallo and I did, but he was somebody who performed services for us when we needed them. But I wouldn't use the term, intimate, not in a amorous manner.
Okay, well, let's
any-
leave intimate alone,
Yeah.
okay? But the other investigator was your investigator, not Mr. Bruce, really.
No, that's not true. Mr. Bruce and Mr. Glaspie were both investigators, and Mr. Glaspie performed services, as did Mr. Bruce.
Okay, very
We
good.
had
But you
two
didn't
at the
meet with
same
them
time.
daily.
Pardon?
You did not meet with them
I
daily.
didn't meet with either one of them daily, but I had phone calls with them and I saw them here when the need arose. We met during the course of the pretrial stages of the case, as well as during the course of the trial. Both of
Okay.
them came to the trial quite a few times, and they gave us reports about getting our witnesses when the time was coming toward the end of November to have them here.
Okay, very good.
You had mentioned about Detective Brew.
He's a special agent, Stan Brew, from the ATF.
Yes, and the phone records that he analyzed, correct?
He testified 3 times about that.
And there were a number of phone records and information between Bob Bashara and Joseph Gentz during this.
Well, there wasn't any information, but there was phone records. There was quite a few pages of phone contacts between the two of them, and then there was the cell tower evidence also.
All right, and I think it was pretty well known that Joseph Gens did some handyman work for Bob Bashara.
Well, it was pretty well known that Mr. Bashara said that Joe Gens did handyman work for him.
All right. Was there any dispute about that?
Well, I don't know whether he did or he didn't.
Okay. Did you ever ask Joseph Bruce to look into that?
No, I don't recall asking him to see whether Mr. Gens ever did any work for Mr. Bashara.
How about J.J. Mckee and his phone records? Did you ever try to get those phone records?
No, I did not try to get his phone records. I noted that we didn't have any. I think there was some effort made to get some information related to him. Phone records, I couldn't tell you exactly whether any effort was made along those lines. I know that Mr. Brew said it would have been helpful to have that information. I knew about J.J. Mckee because I read about him in the discovery. So I thought that the tactic there would be best to show, once again, that the police had failed to follow up on a lead that very well could have produced relevant evidence.
Sure. Can I have a moment here?
All right.
With regard to the closing argument in this case, did you guys have an agreement on who would be conducting the closing argument?
Yes, we did.
And what was that agreement?
Well, initially, the agreement between Mrs. Diallo and myself
This is the
was...
last question. This is beyond the scope, okay?
Fair enough.
Go
Should I
ahead.
answer? The agreement between Mrs. Diallo and myself in the beginning was that she would do the opening statement and I would do the closing argument. And we proceeded with that plan for a number of weeks through the trial. And then as we got close to the end of November, the beginning part of December, right there toward the end of the People's case, Mrs. Diallo expressed to me a desire to be able to go back before the jury in closing argument to underline the points that she had raised in her opening, to be able to tell the jurors herself that the things she had promised that were going to occur or not going to occur during the course of the trial, she had kept her word about, and that they had either seen things or not seen things as she had outlined in her opening statement. And so initially, I was surprised by that, and I said, well, you know, I could do that, but the more we talked, I came to the conclusion that it would be better for her to be able to address not only those points that she wanted to make about the opening statement, but the people that were witnesses that she cross-examined, and that she had, you know, total recall of exactly what good points she had made during the course of the trial with those witnesses. So then we discussed the way to do that, and we devised the plan that we actually put into place, which was that I would begin the closing argument, there would be a place in the middle where she would speak, and then I would conclude the closing argument. And when it was all said and done, she covered those witnesses that she was the one that cross-examined, and I and dealt with the witnesses in the main that I handled. And I thought that it was effective, and I was pleased with the result.
Do you recall when that ultimate decision was made?
Counsel, no. Anything, this is redirect.
I have no further questions.
Any more questions?
Thank you so much, Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Very good. Another witness?
Is Ms. Diallo?
No, she's going to be too long of a witness. I can only go to 3:45 due to your client's medical condition.
Can we just break for the day?
And then just come back tomorrow?
Well, why don't I see if Joseph Bruce is there?
Could you please?
He should be.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Can't find Mr. Bruce.
Back on, Judge.
Do you know if he left the building?
I don't. If I can have a few minutes.
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute recess and you can call him outside the presence. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear affirm testimony about to give this matter the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name, spelling first and last for the record.
Joseph Bruce, Joseph Bruce.
You may proceed, Counselor Law. Pull that microphone closer to you. You may proceed.
Mr. Bruce, what's your occupation?
I'm a private investigator
And how long have you been doing private investigating?
since 1992.
And what's, you do work in this county.
Correct.
Where else do you conduct services?
I'm authorized for court-appointed cases in Wayne, Oakland, Macomb counties, and the Southeast District of Michigan Federal Court.
You were appointed as an investigator for Mr. Bashara.
That's correct.
And when were you appointed?
I was appointed in January of 2014, end of January 2014.
All right. At that point,
The end of January 2014?
I believe so, if I review my
Okay.
order,
Because the trial was over with. Was it January?
2015.
Oh, right, that's right. My number's off. Check and see.
Okay.
Were you employed with him prior with the defender's office?
Yeah,
Just check.
yes, the original order was signed by yourself, Your Honor, on January 23rd of 2014.
Okay, very good.
at that point, who were the attorneys on the case, if you can recall?
Mark Precita and Nancy Schell
Defender's office.
from the Legal Aid Defenders Association of Detroit.
Okay. At some point, they're removed, correct?
Yes,
And Ms. Diallo and Mr. McCarthy are assigned to the case.
yes.
Now, what types of services did you conduct in this case?
Well, it started out as just a routine investigation of going over the discovery and witness list and same thing that the police department do prior to trial.
All right. Now, tell me, you said you reviewed the discovery in this case, is that right?
I had begun,
Okay. What was your understanding of, as an investigator, you're court appointed,
correct,
you get paid by the county for this?
correct.
All right, and what was your understanding on submitting vouchers or things of that nature?
Submitting vouchers or what?
Submitting vouchers to get paid.
Well, because this was a high-profile, large case, I submitted a request for extraordinary fees from the county.
Okay, and were you granted that?
I was.
Okay, what was Were you to submit vouchers on a monthly basis, or how did it work?
According to the final order that I got from the court, I was to submit on a monthly basis. There were other orders presented before that, but that was the final order.
All right, and were you doing that?
Yes, once I received that order.
Okay, and were you getting paid?
No.
Did you inquire about that?
Yes.
And how did you do that?
I made contacts with Deborah Lee, Judge Kinney's secretary, case manager, I don't know her exact position, who was the person that I turned the invoices over to.
Okay, and what follow-up did you do?
Well, after my first vouchers were turned in to Judge Kinney, and I was making inquiries about them being processed, which they hadn't been, because I had checked with the financial department over in the city, Covenant Young building. I was told that I had to have a meeting with Judge Kinney.
And did you have such a meeting?
Yeah, it took about 3 weeks before I could get a meeting with the judge.
Do you recall when that was?
Not off the top of my head, no, and I don't have my records.
Do you recall a month?
I want to say August, but I really don't.
August of 2014.
Correct.
And you had been on this case since January.
Correct.
Just give me a rough estimate, or the court a rough estimate of the amount of time on a weekly basis that you were involved in this case.
Well, up until the point that Ms. Diallo and Mr. McCarthy were appointed, I was kind of just formulating and going over discovery things to formulate what type of investigation I thought would needed to be done. Once Ms. Diallo was appointed to the case, and that's when I submitted to the court for the extraordinary fees. Once I submitted that for the extraordinary fees, it was all incumbent. That was pretty much all I did.
So put an hour on it per week.
Well, it depended. It wasn't every week, but when I worked on it, 40, 60 hours once things got rolling.
All right. Now, you had a discussion with Judge Kenny.
Correct. Correct.
And what was the result of that meeting with him?
Well, the reason that Judge Kinney wanted to see me, he inquired as to why I had spent time reading the discovery of the case.
Okay, now let me stop you there. Is that something that you do on a regular basis in the case?
Yes. In order to investigate a case, you need to have knowledge of every aspect of the case. There's nothing, especially anything written, okay, or hard copy, there's nothing that is not important or is not necessary to read, because before you read it, you don't know if it's important. You don't know if it exposes something that you may need to further investigate. But Judge Kinney basically told me I didn't need to read the discovery.
All right. What was your reaction to that?
I was stunned, because when I went into the meeting, I pretty much had in my mind going over anything that he could have asked me about the time that I was spending on the case. And when he asked me that, I was just stunned, because there's no way you can investigate a case without reading the discovery.
Now, there was another area also that he questioned you about doing skip traces.
Correct.
What are skip traces?
Basically just your electronic media, the sources that you have. There are some information sources that you have to be a licensed investigator to use, and just other ways of trying to locate a person.
Okay, and he questioned your work in that area as well, is that correct?
Correct.
What person did you want to locate?
There was numerous people that wanted to locate. There was two sides of that. One side was that there was the prosecutor's witness list. Now, once we received the prosecutor's witness list,
All right, stop. We're going to have to call you off. Lillian Diallo's in trial, so I'm going to put her on now. Go get her. Off the record. Where is she? Just tell her to call in now. We're ready.
Yeah, check and see if there's anything.
I need, step down with her. I need Judge Callahan's number, please. Does he go all day?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
5246. 5246.
Look, we're going to have to cancel Monday's docket. Oh, but she going to be in trial.
And it goes on Friday.
Well, I'm not going Friday. Hey, is Judge Callahan available? This is Judge Evans. We're about to start with Lillian Diallo in this Bashara case. And she's got a trial tomorrow. Okay, hold on. Excuse me, Madam. Thursday. Tomorrow's Wednesday.
This is what your secretary told me.
Okay, and this is Judge James Callahan's. Okay, very good. Thank you. Ms. Diallo, you have a case starting Thursday?
I have a homicide starting Thursday morning in
Oh.
the afternoon.
Okay, but not tomorrow.
No, tomorrow I have things to do.
No, you don't. You're
Yes,
gonna be
I do.
what?
I can't put it, I'm not gonna tell them.
No, but you're gonna have to be here.
I can't. I got stuff that I have to. There's
Can you
something-
approach?
Yes. Hello.
Why can't you be here?
Sometime in April,
Or March or April.
sometime around. The case involved much media attention.
It involved a lot of attention.
Okay. And was that ever a concern for you?
It was.
Okay. And how so?
Well, there was media attention. It was not just local, it was national based on lots of conversations Mr. Bashara had.
And when you say national, are you saying on a consistent basis or?
Listen. Let me explain that. We're only gonna have Mr. Diallo till tomorrow till 1:30, so we're gonna have to move on. As far as the publicity, we don't know. Let's just keep it moving. Let's talk specifically about what she did in this particular matter because she's not available after 1:30 tomorrow, okay?
Okay.
in front of Judge Vonda Evans in Wayne County Circuit Court.
And that's what he told you?
Yes.
Did he express that to Mr. McCarthy?
I wouldn't know what he expressed to Mr. McCarthy. However, I know I met with Mr. Bashara multiple times, and I know one of those conversations was in front of Mr. McCarthy about how he loved being here and how fair he was being treated, which I had to agree on. He was being treated very fair.
Treated very fairly by the court?
Yes.
Okay. What about outside of court?
How would I know?
And how is that relevant?
Because
Keep moving. I don't care. We're talking about what's going on in this court and what she did.
well, it involves the motion for a change of venue.
Okay, very good. We'll move past it. Keep going.
I don't, well,
I've ruled.
as to the, you were aware that there was publicity of this case,
Yes.
and that most of the publicity of the case was, if not all, against Mr. Bashara, correct?
Well, I didn't watch that much TV, but, you know, there was bad stuff out there about Mr. Bashara.
Okay, and
Talked about the case ad nauseum.
Speak into the.
I'm sorry. We talked about this case ad nauseum. Every aspect, every element, everything about this case. If Mr. Bashara didn't want something or didn't want to be somewhere, he had a mouth and he knew how to use it.
okay. You got the case in, let's say, March 2014, April, and how much, there's quite a number of documents to go through, correct?
Oh, yes, it was.
All right, and tell, just how much?
A lot.
10 boxes.
I don't know. I had a hard drive, and I would go through the data, and I would print things out. There were a lot of documents.
Okay.
10 boxes would be fair.
Okay. You were assigned to 2 investigators,
Yes, I was.
and those persons?
Hank Glaspie, retired FBI.
And who else?
Joseph Bruce, retired DPD homicide.
What types of things did you have Mr. Bruce investigate?
We talked about witness statements. We talked about JJ.
Okay,
and
let's talk about JJ. What do you have Mr. Bruce look into regarding Mr. Mckee?
do your job. He was the investigator. I'm the lawyer. You go out and you interview JJ. You find out, beat the streets, do what you do as a professional.
And why did you think J.J. Mckee was important?
Everybody was important, but JJ allegedly was someone that might have been with Joseph Gentz the night of the homicide, before the homicide, after the homicide.
And your understanding that Mr. Bruce was never able to contact him?
He had quite a bit of difficulty. He beat the streets, as far as I'm concerned. He talked to someone named Lori Mckee, who had some kind of relationship with JJ. Very hostile group of people.
Well, did you ever locate JJ?
No, ma'am.
You said everybody would be important, but he was with Mr. Gentz on the evening of the murder.
How would I know who was with Mr. Gentz? I know I wasn't.
All right, but there were reports that J.J. Mckee and Joseph Gentz were together on that evening.
Well, there were some things that I found throughout the course of discovery that might suggest such. And I even think I argued that in my closing.
Okay. Besides, okay, so you were mentioning about J.J. Mckee, and what other witnesses did you want Mr. Bruce to track down and interview?
Whatever I asked him to do, he did.
And what were some of those things?
Track down witnesses, talk to people. You have the witness statements.
Okay. Were you ever informed that he wasn't getting paid for his services?
Toward the end of the case.
Okay, so that was something that you became aware of?
At the end, absolutely, and I believe it was in December. The
Okay.
case was over in December.
All right.
But did he ever indicate to you when you asked him to do investigation prior to December that he would not because he wasn't being paid?
Not prior to December, no ma'am.
Okay.
When the case gets started, do you recall how the jury was selected?
You asked them questions.
All right. Now, there were some questionnaires that were sent out to the jury pool prior, or provided to them, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and what, to your knowledge, what was the purpose of, the purpose of it was because there was a high publicity case?
Okay.
What about it?
I mean, you tell me, was there?
Are you asking me to
Yeah.
tell you? Well, we wanted a fair jury for Robert Bashara. And we sent the questionnaires out to try to weed out anything or anyone that would be unfair to Mr. Bashara. And we even had a jury consultant that we spent hour upon hour with in determining what would be a fair juror for Mr. Bashara.
Now, was that done, the meeting with the consultant, when was that done?
He was here the day of. I'd spent time on the phone, numerous hours on the phone. I believe we got for Mr.
And
Bashara.
A, B, and C being the groups.
The panels, correct, I'm sorry. There were groups. We broke them down into A, B, and C, and each one of them had questionnaires that were filled out. And so based on the questions, I would talk to the jury consultant to find out, okay, is this person a suitable juror? We would go through the questions, get the psychology of that particular person based on the questions.
Okay, were any of the potential jurors weeded out prior to them entering the courtroom?
My paperwork, absolutely, because some presented, I don't know if it was an overreaction or just trying to get out of jury duty, as psychotic.
And give us an example.
What do you mean? I just remember some things were just so clearly over the top. Some of the answers were...
We don't need to know him, but they weren't on a jury, so it don't make a difference.
No,
Move
they
on.
Well,
Move on.
the people that were, did anybody express, that you know, express a bias in favor of Mr. Bashara?
What do you mean a bias in favor? You mean did they say they could be fair? Sure. We had 14 or 16 of them sitting over there.
There were, well, you tell me, in your review of the juror questionnaires, did some say that they had expressed a bias against Mr. Bashara were made in front of the other 16 that were actually seated, correct?
I don't know. I don't remember. That was a long time ago. What are you saying?
I'm saying that some that had expressed a bias against Mr. Bashara, those statements were made in front of the other jurors.
It could have, but ultimately, the 16 that sat there said that they could be fair, and that's what we had to rely on.
And impartial.
That's right, Judge. And impartial.
Fair. There was evidence in the case regarding, well, you had reviewed all the documents and all the discovery, correct?
Yes.
And there was some evidence in the case that Jane Bashara's clothing was not released to the police.
That was the evidence. That was evidence. It came from this witness stand, yes.
Right. Think that would have been important to have secure that evidence?
How would we have done that? It was destroyed. It was gone.
No, I understand. But I mean, don't you think that there was a problem with the prosecution, correct?
Yes, any problem that I thought the prosecution had, you better believe I doubled down on.
And when
No.
you say you double down, what do you
I
mean?
exposed it. I did what I was supposed to do as an attorney. So whatever problems they had, I didn't sit there and twiddle my thumbs.
No, I appreciate that.
Good.
Prior to the trial, did you ever file a motion for like a Brady violation?
No.
Okay.
You want to know about the motions we did file?
Answer the
Oh, I'm
questions
sorry.
asked to
I'm sorry.
you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There was also evidence in the case regarding some of the leaves, vegetation, and so forth. Did you make any type of objection to that being disclosed at such a late date?
I believe that that actually helped Mr. Bashara. And matter of fact, it did help Mr. Bashara, and of course, it was something that we would have liked to have had earlier. But if it helps the client, for God's sake, we got to do it, right? Oh, I'm sorry, don't ask questions, right?
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Did you ever ask for a mistrial because of that?
Because of what?
Because of they never disclosed this potentially, it's a benefit to Mr. Bashara,
Sure
right?
it was.
And they didn't give that to you until the time of trial,
But guess-
late in the case.
I know. And I used it.
And wouldn't it have been a little bit better for you to prepare for the case if you had that evidence prior to?
Are you saying for me? I'm pretty quick. So I was able to come up to speed.
Isn't it normal procedure to disclose everything about the case, the prosecution's duty to give him everything prior to trial?
You're asking me about the prosecutor? Well, I would hope they wouldn't cheat. And, I think they gave me what they had when they got it. So if they wanted to cheat, I don't think I would have ever got that leaf report. And the leaf report helped Robert Bashara's position, but ultimately the jury did what the jury did.
Okay. Now, the jury did what the jury did. And the case was submitted to the jury after a 9-week trial, or what have you, correct?
I thought it was 11 weeks, but if you
Okay.
say 9, I'm going to stick with, no, you say 9.
And do you recall how long they deliberated?
No. I know that one of those days he was in the hospital or something was going on.
A couple days.
A couple of days. So, they deliberated.
And it was more than one day.
Okay.
Well, I'm asking you, if you don't recall.
If she
you
does,
don't
she
recall.
says she doesn't know. Let's
Okay.
go ahead.
Do you recall anything regarding the notes that were sent out by the jury?
I remember there were notes that were sent out, but I haven't reviewed them. I haven't reviewed the court file before I testified here today.
Okay. Anything with regard to, do you recall? And if you don't, you don't. Do you recall them sending out a note explaining what or reasonable doubt was?
I do a lot of trials, but no, I don't.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and you have no recollection of what the judge said?
This judge?
Yeah, Judge Fonda.
No, if I don't remember, no.
Okay.
Do
Fair
you
enough.
recall me using the example about reasonable doubt about the woman who was engaged to somebody, finding them at the hotel?
Oh, drive. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Okay. What did you think about that?
It was just fine.
You thought it was just fine?
Yes.
And no thought on your mind to object to that?
Well, I didn't find it objectionable.
Okay. And, okay.
And Bob Bashara sat right next to me, too. He didn't say anything to me about it being objectionable.
Well, Fair enough.
Thank you.
Can I just have one moment, Your Honor?
Of course. It's 3:30, but I gotta go beyond because I cannot lose love.
I only asked my notes.
Oh.
Phone is off, so I can't see how to keep turning on.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
She's kind of like a mind hunter.
Can attorneys approach Mr. Ambrose? Come on. Excuse me.
Yeah, I agree.
Break at this point. I'll see everybody promptly at 8:30. Okay, court is in recess for today.